My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 36 years old, I thought being the reliable one in the family was something to be proud of. Whenever there was a crisis, I was the first person people called. When my younger sister needed help paying rent after college, I sent money. When my mother needed help covering medical bills, I paid them. When my father struggled after losing his job, I quietly stepped in without expecting thanks. For years, I convinced myself that family wasn't about keeping score. Family was about showing up. No matter what, that belief followed me through every disappointment, every one-sided relationship, and every sacrifice I made for people who rarely seemed to notice. So when my younger sister Jessica announced she was getting married, I was genuinely excited. I still remember the phone call. She was laughing, crying, and talking so fast I could barely keep up. "The wedding is going to be amazing," she said. And honestly, I believed her. What I didn't realize was that her wedding would become the moment that changed how I viewed my entire family forever. At the time, I was living in Chicago while the rest of my family remained in North Carolina. Distance made things difficult, but I tried my best to stay involved. A few weeks after the engagement, my mother called. At first, she sounded unusually sweet. That should have been my first warning. "Sarah, honey," she said, "we need a little favor." I asked what they needed. The wedding vendors require someone with strong financial credentials to guarantee some of the contracts. I frowned. "What does that mean exactly?" "It's just paperwork," she replied quickly. "They need a responsible signer." My mother explained that Jessica and her fiancé didn't have enough credit history to secure several large contracts. Apparently, some vendors wanted additional financial protection. Since I had excellent credit and stable income, they wanted me to help. I hesitated, not because I didn't trust my family, because I trusted them too much. Looking back, that's what made me vulnerable. My mother assured me repeatedly that everything would be paid on time. Jessica promised she would personally handle every bill. And like always, I agreed. Over the next several months, documents arrived one after another. The wedding venue, the catering company, the florist, the photographer, the transportation service. Every time another contract appeared, I signed it. Every time someone thanked me, I felt appreciated. For once, or at least I thought I did. As wedding planning continued, something strange started happening. Important decisions were made without me. Family group chats suddenly became quiet whenever I joined. Questions often went unanswered. Sometimes I discover major wedding updates through social media posts instead of family conversations. When I asked Jessica about it, she brushed it off. "We're just busy." When I asked my mother, she said I was imagining things. So I ignored the feeling growing in my stomach. The feeling that I was useful, but not included. Months passed. The wedding grew closer. I purchased an expensive plane ticket, reserved a hotel room, bought a thoughtful wedding gift, used vacation days from work. I wanted everything to be perfect for Jessica. After all, she was my little sister. The day before the wedding, I arrived in North Carolina exhausted but excited. I texted Jessica. No response. I called. Straight to voicemail. I texted my mother. Hours passed. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself everyone was overwhelmed with wedding preparations. The next morning, I woke up early. I spent extra time getting ready. I carefully wrapped Jessica's gift. I even looked at old childhood photos on my phone before leaving the hotel. Photos of two little sisters who used to tell each other everything. By the time I arrived at the venue, I felt hopeful. The place looked beautiful. White flowers lined the entrance. Music drifted through the air. Guests laughed and mingled outside. Everything looked exactly how a wedding should. For a moment, I smiled. Then I saw my mother, and everything changed. She walked directly toward me with an expression I had never seen before. Not happiness, not excitement, not even nervousness. Coldness, pure coldness. I smiled and opened my arms for a hug. She didn't hug me. Instead, she stopped a few feet away. "Sarah," she said quietly, "we need to talk." Immediately, something felt wrong. What happened? My mother's eyes shifted toward the venue entrance, then back to me. "You can't come inside." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. What? You need to leave. I laughed nervously. Mom, stop joking. She wasn't joking. The expression on her face never changed. My stomach dropped. I flew across the country for this wedding. I know. I'm Jessica's sister. I know. Then what are you talking about? My mother folded her arms. The groom's family doesn't think your presence is appropriate. I stared at her, certain I'd misunderstood. What does that even mean? She avoided my eyes. They feel you'll attract attention. I felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. Attention! Before she could answer, another guest approached the entrance. The woman smiled politely and asked my mother who I was. What happened next hurt more than anything else. My mother looked directly at me. Then she turned to the guest. Oh, she's just a distant relative. The words hit harder than a slap. Just a distant relative. Not her daughter. Not Jessica's sister. Not the woman who had spent months helping fund this wedding. Just a distant relative. The guest nodded and walked away. But I remained frozen, because suddenly everything made sense. The ignored messages, the secret meetings, the missing invitations, the cold responses. This wasn't a last-minute decision. This had been planned for months. And that's when I noticed something interesting. Something that made all the confusion disappear. A detail buried inside a conversation I'd accidentally overheard weeks earlier. A detail connected to every single wedding contract I had signed. A detail my family clearly didn't know I remembered. For the first time all day, I almost smiled. Not because I wasn't heartbroken. I was. But because my mother had just unknowingly triggered a chain of events that would completely change everything. I looked at the venue, then at my mother, then at the wedding gift in my hands. And instead of arguing, instead of crying, instead of making a scene, I simply said, okay. The relief that flashed across her face told me she thought she'd won. She had no idea what was about to happen next. I drove back to my hotel without looking back. The entire journey felt surreal. Less than an hour earlier, I'd been excited to celebrate my sister's wedding. Now I was sitting alone in a parking lot, staring at my steering wheel and trying to process what had just happened. My own mother had introduced me as a distant relative. Not because she was confused, not because she'd made a mistake, because she'd chosen to. And somehow, that hurt more than being excluded from the wedding itself. I carried the gift inside my hotel room and set it on the dresser. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed. For a while, I simply stared at the wall. I should have been crying. I should have been angry. Instead, I kept thinking about that conversation I'd overheard weeks earlier. One of the venue managers had mentioned a specific clause during a conference call. At the time, nobody else seemed interested. But because I work in corporate finance, details stick with me, especially expensive ones. I opened my laptop, pulled up the contracts, and started reading. 20 minutes later, I found it. There it was, buried deep inside the agreement, exactly where I remembered. My pulse quickened. The clause was simple. If the authorized guarantor of the event was denied access, removed, or intentionally excluded by the organizers, liability immediately transferred to the contracting parties hosting the event. In other words, the people running the wedding. Not me. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. Then I laughed. Not because the situation was funny, because it was unbelievable. My family had spent months using my credit, my reputation, and my financial standing. And then they had triggered the very clause designed to protect me. Without realizing it, I immediately called the venue. The manager answered. I calmly explained what had happened. To my surprise, he already knew. Apparently several guests had witnessed the confrontation at the entrance. After reviewing the contract, he confirmed my understanding. Then I called the catering company. Same answer. Then the transportation company. Then the decorator. One by one, every vendor reached the same conclusion. I was no longer responsible. The event organizers were. For the first time all day, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Not revenge. Not satisfaction. Just relief. The next morning, my phone exploded. 23 missed calls. 9 text messages. 4 voicemails. Every single one came from family. Apparently, the wedding reception had ended only a few hours earlier when reality arrived. Several vendors had already begun updating billing information. Others had sent notices requesting immediate contact. The total amount outstanding exceeded $42,000. My phone rang again. "Jessica." I answered. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she started crying. "Sarah, please." I closed my eyes. It was the first time she'd spoken to me since the wedding. Not before. Not during. After. When she needed something. "What's wrong?" I asked quietly. "You know what's wrong." I remained silent. "The vendors are saying we owe everything." I looked out the hotel window. "The contracts explain why. Please don't do this." The irony almost took my breath away. She thought I was doing something, when all I had done was stop protecting people who never protected me. "Jessica," I said softly, "why wasn't I allowed inside?" Silence. Long silence. Then she answered, "The groom's parents thought you might embarrass us." I laughed once. A short, humorless laugh. "Embarrass you?" She didn't respond, because even she knew how ridiculous it sounded. I had helped pay for the wedding, helped organize it, helped secure it, and somehow I was the embarrassment. The conversation ended shortly afterward, not because I hung up, because neither of us had anything left to say. Over the next several days, more calls arrived. My mother, my aunt, several cousins. Every conversation followed the same pattern. First came guilt, then came excuses, then came demands. Nobody talked about the wedding entrance. Nobody talked about the humiliation. Nobody talked about introducing me as a distant relative. They only talked about money, and that told me everything. A week later, my mother finally called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. She sounded exhausted, older, defeated. "Sarah!" For once, there was no anger in her voice, no authority, no manipulation, just exhaustion. "Can we talk?" I agreed. What followed was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. She admitted that the groom's family had complained about me months earlier. Apparently they viewed my success, independence, and financial stability as intimidating. Rather than defending me, my mother had decided it would be easier to exclude me. Easier than risking conflict. Easier than standing up for her own daughter. Listening to her explanation didn't make the betrayal hurt less, but it finally made it make sense. The truth wasn't that I had done something wrong. The truth was much simpler. I had spent years sacrificing for people who valued comfort more than loyalty. Months passed. The financial consequences continued. Jessica and her husband were forced to arrange payment plans. Several relationships within the family fractured. People took sides. Questions were asked. Stories unraveled. And eventually, the truth became impossible to hide. What surprised me most wasn't the financial fallout. It was what happened to me. For years, I believed love had to be earned. That if I gave enough, helped enough, sacrificed enough, people would eventually choose me. That wedding taught me otherwise. Real love doesn't require endless proof. Real family doesn't only remember your value when a bill arrives. And real relationships don't disappear the moment you stop being useful. Almost a year later, Jessica reached out again. This time there were no requests, no excuses, no money, just an apology, a genuine one. For the first time, she accepted responsibility without expecting anything in return. Our relationship slowly began to heal after that. Not because I forgot, because she finally understood. As for my mother, forgiveness came much more slowly. Trust once broken doesn't magically return. But eventually, she admitted something she'd spent years avoiding. That she had cared more about keeping peace with strangers than protecting her own daughter. Hearing those words didn't erase the past, but it mattered. Today, when people ask about my sister's wedding, I don't think about the flowers, or the venue, or the money. I think about the moment my mother blocked that doorway, because that was the day I stopped begging for a seat at someone else's table, and started building my own. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't making someone suffer. Sometimes it's refusing to keep sacrificing yourself for people who never deserve the sacrifice in the first place. And trust me, that lesson was worth far more than $42,000.